So we are going to be talking about man training with video modeling today, which is something I'm really interested in. So I'm really excited. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to make this full screen so it's easier to look at. Let's just go in and talk about rationale, which is why I picked the topic of man training. As of right now, man training is associated with my thesis. It may be different, but when I was looking at studies associated with man training, the results came up with the term video modeling. So I thought that was really cool. And when I was talking to Dr. King, I was like, well, video modeling is something that I can do. So after we talked, I went and I searched studies on video modeling with man training or just verbal repertoire, and I found a lot of articles. So this is a study by Plavnick called Establishing Verbal Repertoires with Children with Autism Using Function-Based Video Modeling. Function-based is where you have, just like an FBA, you have different function areas, functional, like tangible and attention and control, and you're contriving the EOs for the child to mand. So it's really interesting. I am not going to talk about the experiment 1. I just focused more on experiment 2 where there were man training, but this article does talk about a little bit about the whole experimental control of the phases. So that was kind of cool, but then I just went into the function-based and looked at the research. But let's talk about overview of what is a mand. So Skinner defines the mand as a verbal operant that is reinforced by the delivery of a specific consequence and is therefore under the control of deprivation related to that consequence. I love that definition. I think that's great. But sometimes I look at that definition and I'm not understanding it completely. So I went to Cooper and I got like a more concise definition, and it's the response is simply under the functional control of an MO and specific reinforcement. So the way that I remember this is an MO might be hunger, and the specific reinforcement is going to be a hamburger from McDonald's because my motivating operation is hunger. And I'm not always craving a hamburger until I have that motivating operation already set. So a mand has to have the motivating operation, whereas a tact doesn't. You could just say, hey, that's a phone. But how do you train using mands? Sundberg and Partington describe man training as the first step in a comprehensive language training program for children with autism. And then in the article, Plavnick says a critical component of man training is to contrive the EO, which is going to increase the value of the reinforcer. And once it is, the interventionist is going to model a target prompt and or model a target response until the learner emits the man, and then you fade it away. So that is pretty much what they are doing in this research study that I will talk about in a minute. So some example of mands we've talked about. Verbal behavior does not always have to be vocal speech. It just has to be mediated by a reinforcement or reinforcer. So it could be sign language. A child might need to go to the bathroom, signs bathroom. It could be the picture exchange system, PECS. So a nonverbal student might choose to read his picture when asked by the RBT, what do you want to eat today? And it can also be vocal speech like, may I go to the restroom? Again, the verbal operant mand, its consequence is directly effective. You're not social with the mand. So an example is a boy is being bathed by his father and says more bubbles, so the father pours more bubble mixture into the bath and turns on the tap. You're immediately getting reinforced by the MO, right? This child was wanting more bubbles because in the end, the consequence is going to be happiness. He's going to be excited. So it's directly effective from whatever's going on, okay? Because in a COIC, the therapist says, great. Yeah, the child repeated apple, but it's not directly affected to the MO. With a COIC, there is no MO. So that's why you want to start with a mand. In summation, I think that mands help condition us as therapists to be reinforcers to the environment around the students. The mands benefit the learner because they bring wanted items to them. Also, manding can decrease problem behavior by giving them functional communication to replace the problem behaviors. Some students with autism may not know what to do when they want something. So having that sign language or PECS or spoken speech or vocal speech will give them what they need to ask for. And then lastly, mand training can assist in developing a social interaction. Can I have this, please? And that can be reinforcers such as praise, compliments, and gifts. So now we are going to transition into the whole study that I was talking about earlier. So right in, I forgot to tell the name in this slide. So the name was Establishing Verbal Repertoires with Children with Autism Using Function-Based Video Modeling. Function-based means, like I said, you're in a control function, you're doing a attention function, and it's just where you're contriving the EOs. The participants that were involved, the study was done with 4 participants, age ranging from 4 to 6.5. Their names were Fuller, Victor, Matthew, and also Bailey. And so Fuller and Bailey each demonstrated delayed echolalia in the form of 1 to 2 word utterances. When prompted, Bailey does imitate. Fuller did not imitate, but Victor and Matthew have no history of responding at any time. So you'll see that Matthew ended up having to do PECS, which is really interesting, and I really like his graph because it's more interesting to see. Okay, so let's talk about design and procedure. This one was a little bit different because, like I said, Matthew ends up having an alternating treatment design, but it's used in isolation to examine the differential effects of conditions on a picture exchange versus video modeling a function and non-function, which was with Fuller, Bailey, and Victor. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then, for Fuller, Bailey, and Victor, it's a multiple probe, so across behaviors. So in baseline, if the child emitted the targeted mand within 20 seconds of the stimulus presentation, they're going to provide that 20-second access that corresponded with the mand. If they did not, the experimenter is going to head and remove the stimuli. So 5 trials for each target mand were administered in random during the baseline session. The total number of trials per session started at 30 when all the target mands were probed, and they eventually faded that to 10 as the mand pairs were targeted for successfully. Let's talk about video modeling. The experimenter started all video modeling sessions by instructing the participant to sit down at the table. So to start each trial, the experimenter showed the participant a video clip that corresponded with the target mand for that specific session. So like I said, it was in play session or control or attention, and after showing the video, the experimenter delivered the programmed antecedents. She might pause 20 seconds to allow that participant to emit the target response, and then provide the consequence contingent on the targeted response. And they would do this for each trial. And for each 5 trials of one modeling condition. They're going to do 3-minute break, and then they're going to do 5 trials of the next particular word pair. So once the child got 80% for one of the targets in the word pair, the word was acquired. So what did those results look like? This is just pretty much a summary of that. I don't like to read results because I don't feel like you're going to understand it as much, but if you see on baseline, nobody admitted verbal responses or target responses. The baseline is very flat. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. But when video modeling was introduced, Fuller acquired all 3 target bands, which is really cool. If we look at Fuller, we'll see the word pair 1, help me, and then come play. So, you see where it's function based. He got 81% or 80%. And then the follow-up, it was 100%. So obviously Fuller was doing really good, and then he remained after follow-up at 100% accuracy. So it definitely worked for Fuller, which was really cool. Like I said, Bailey did not emit verbal responses during baseline, but she rapidly acquired function-based commands for the first and second word pair. So it was, for open this, it was 97%, I think, and for break, it was 85%, which was, I mean, we're looking at Fuller, so you can't see. Sorry. Let me say that again. For help me, it was 97%, and then for come play, it was 85%. Okay, and then if we're looking at Victor's graph, he got 100%, 67%, and 50%, which was really cool because from open to wow, Victor was at least at 90%. So that's really good. That shows that it's working. And then for Matthew, demonstrated no responding during baseline, and when it was introduced, during function-based, it was 80%, and then non-function-based, it was 41%. So function-based works. When you're set in a contrived EO for attention, help, look, obviously these separate word component or word pairs for each condition make sense. And when you break them down, the child's more easy or more better at understanding what goes with what. And so, in conclusion, if you do related based on the function of communicative behavior and not just identified behavior function, or let me rephrase that. If you're doing it more on related based on the function for communicative behavior, there's better results than just doing communicative behavior at all times. There's no breaks. They're not understanding that look at me goes with attention versus break goes with escape. They're just learning these words and then not knowing when to actually say them. So if you're doing a video modeling using function based, then the child is more easily going to understand when to omit those verbal responses. And it's not all chaotic. So I really thought that it was a very, very hard research article. So that's probably why my words are jumbled up. But in conclusion, it does work. And this approach can also serve public school teachers in a better way. If they don't have a background in ABA, it's really good because, again, it tells you what to do in this article for each control setting. And so it's really nice because the child is able to identify which mans go with which time they need them. And so I really thought it was awesome. The last thing I'll talk about, I guess, is my references. So I used the Cooper book and I used my Plavnick article, and that was in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Analysis in the winter of 2011. So really cool. Like I said, it's kind of a confusing article, but it's one of those articles I will go back to, and it was really good. So hopefully you guys learned something a little bit. And yeah, have a great weekend.